I've got the top of the cabinet all squared away, so let's move on to the veneer itself. Here's the huge 8-foot long sheet I picked up. This is what they call face cut veneer, which has a more pronounced grain to it as opposed to quarter cut, like this piece where it's thin lines. The rest of the cabinet is face cut, so this is more appropriate to use. The difference between face cut and quarter cut has to do with how they actually slice the veneer out of the tree log itself. As I mentioned before, this is paperback, so there's a thin brown paper on the back which helps to stabilize the veneer so the edges don't start splitting apart. So I'm going to cut a piece out of this, leaving about a 2-inch overhang on the sides, and I'll cut it so that the grain is going this way, which is how the old veneer went. I'll grab a T-square and a pencil and mark it out, and I'll cut it out with this very sharp utility knife. I was able to cut out a nice square of veneer pretty easily. This stuff is so thin, a nice sharp box cutter will go right through it, and a straight edge like this will help you keep everything square. So it's going to go on something like this. I left a nice overhang on each side, so after I glue this down I'll have to just go around and trim it up. But best to have it too long than too short, because it's not so easy to add wood back on. Now the next step is to coat the back of this and the top of the cabinet with some Titebond too. There's plenty of different techniques you could use. There's cold press veneer glue, you could use contact cement, you could use hide glue. But I did do a few tests with this stuff, and I was pretty happy with the results, so I'm going to go with this. So I'll squirt this into a little bowl, dilute it a little bit with water, maybe like 3 parts glue to 1 part water. Spread it on, let it dry for a few hours, put on another coat of glue, and let that cure up on both surfaces for about 24 hours. And I'll pick up then. The first layer of glue dried, and now I'm putting on a second layer. So you can see it's just diluted wood glue. Painting it on. The areas that are already done, it's completely dry, and that is the secret of doing this, is both this is dry and the sheet of veneer, so you can take your time and position the veneer exactly where it's supposed to go, and then when you heat it with an iron, it's like ironing a shirt, it will reactivate the dried glue and bond it together really hard, really solid. Something you want to make sure you do is get a good bead of glue along the edge. So after I paint this on, I'm actually going to go and use some straight up non-diluted glue to make sure I get a nice thick bead of glue on the edge, because when veneer separates, it usually starts at the edge and starts popping up. So once this is on, I'll let this dry until tomorrow, and then hopefully I'll be ironing on the veneer pretty soon. Here we are the next day. My diluted glue has dried up nicely, and I'm getting ready to iron on the veneer. I've positioned it so the grain is running in the proper direction, and I put some clothespins around the edges to serve as spacers. So when I slide up the veneer and the clothespin hits, I know that I've got a consistent gap all around. I put some paper down between the iron and the veneer, so when I press the iron down, I won't damage the veneer. As for the iron itself, just a standard iron like you would use for clothing, but no water. You do not want to use steam while you do this. I've got it set on the medium heat setting. I'll see how that goes. If I need to, I'll increase the heat. Another nice thing about this technique is that if there are any areas that don't stick that well, you can just always reheat it as often as needed until you get it all stuck down. I'm going to start in the middle and work my way outwards to eliminate any air pockets, and I'll pick up when I'm a little bit further along in the process, and we'll see how this goes. This is working really well so far. I've done the center section here and it's glued down really tight. I also found it useful that while it's still hot from the iron, to take a J-roller, which is a rubber cylinder on the a J-shaped rod here, and roll it really hard back and forth to make sure it's stuck down really tight. I'll continue on with the rest of it now. I finished ironing on the veneer. Now I've flipped it over upside down and I'm going to carefully trim off the excess with a utility knife. I finished trimming and sanding the edges and nice and smooth now. So I've got myself one nice new veneer top. So now the real fun begins. I will need to seal this and start filling in the grain. I think I'll use shellac for that. This is pretty open grain stuff, being mahogany. And the toner lacquers and finish lacquers and so on. But before I can really get into that, I need to figure out what I want to do with the rest of this cabinet. So I got some dings and scrapes here I want to fill in, and I'm going to flip this over and see if I can remove this control area, because that would make my life a lot easier. I also need to double check to see if I can get some replacement decals. But even if I can get replacement decals, stripping this out and refinishing all these grooves while it's all assembled like this is really going to be a pain. So I'm going to flip this over. Hopefully there's some screws I can take out and maybe break loose the glue joints and try to pop this whole section out. Well, I removed every screw I could find, and it did loosen it up a bit, but it's still on here awfully tight. I think the real problem is that, in addition to the screws, this is glued on. So to get this apart, I would have to take something like a chisel and start getting in there and trying to break this apart. I don't think it's worth damaging this, so I think I'll just screw it back together and glue up some of the looser areas and just deal with it in place. Something else I noticed too is that you can see as I tilt the camera down, this thing's upside down right now, but this is the top surface, and so here's the mahogany finish and so on. Well, now that I can see it from the bottom side, this has no finish on it. So when they worked on this, they probably sprayed this after it was all together and just did a quick job. So I guess I shouldn't really go too far out of my way to make this perfect, since it wasn't to begin with. While cleaning this out, I also found a nice little present in the speaker area, which was packed with a bunch of crap that was probably a little mouse nest in there, so yeah. Moving on to the sides, I did have a bit of veneer damage. I glued and clamped that up, but it was pretty ragged here, so I took a blade and cut it off clean, trying to leave as much of the old veneer as possible. Well, when I peeled the veneer off the top, I saved all the larger, nicer pieces, so I'm going to try cutting a patch out of that. If it doesn't look that good because of this angle here, I might just cut this straight all the way down to the front and just put a whole new long strip in place. See how that goes. And that just leaves me with a few little nicks and dings, like over here. I'll just take some more little chips of veneer and glue them in place. And then, well, I still have the legs to strip, a little bit of finish off here and there. And I'll ponder a bit more about how best to strip and refinish this. Here's what I came up for a solution to this missing veneer. I taped a piece of paper over the area and then rubbed over it with pencil lead to make a pattern. I then cut that pattern out, put it over a piece of the scrap veneer from the top, and cut out a patch. It fits pretty well. Once I glue it in and clamp it and sand over it, I think it will blend in nicely. And here's the patch glued in place. A little bit of a gap here and there, but once I fill it in with some wood filler and put on the toning lacquer and such, it'll disappear. So I think that'll work out just fine. And here's the top after a few layers of shellac and some sanding, and I think that's coming along very nicely. little more sanding, and start moving on to the toner lacquer on that. And as for the controls, I did look up the one place that sells controls, or sorry, decals like this, and they are about the right size, but they don't have all the words. Like, I don't think they have selector, and they don't have knob and the word bar. So what I'm going to try to do is take some Howard's Restorer finish, some very fine steel wool, and try to touch this up. And if I can, and it looks okay, I will then move on to trying to fix up these nicks and dings. And if I'm satisfied with the look of it, I'm going to mask off this control area while I refinish the whole rest of the cabinet, and I'll try to match the colors as best I can. But even though if they're off a little bit, because this is such a separate, distinct area, if the shade of mahogany is a little bit different, I don't think it'll look bad at all. I think I'll pick up recording in a few days when I'm a lot further along on this cabinet. Don't want to bore you guys too much.